Now I know a lot of my viewers aren't necessarily horror fans. You lean more towards the fantasy genre. I got some tips for you. Hey, what's up, bookworms and horror fans, or maybe just fantasy fans maybe looking to get into horror? I got an idea for a video today that I think would be appropriate since we have now officially arrived in the month of October. My favorite month of the year because I get to pay a little extra attention to that little genre I love so much known as horror. But I know a lot of you out there are more fantasy, haven't really touched horror. But the question I've gotten the last few years are, okay, look, I'm mostly a fantasy reader, never really got into horror. I don't necessarily want to go just for what you think is a good start of horror, but maybe something that is aimed more towards horror for fantasy fans. So say you want to go from dragons to demons, I think these will be some great books for you to check out. Now, I got 10 of them here. We'll maybe lean a bit more towards the fantasy fan, more so than just people who are looking for their first bite of horror. I think these are actually going to have some of those elements that have made you come to love the fantasy genre, and you still can find them here. It's not as simple as just replace a dragon with a demon, but it's not as far off as you do think. Let's start with one of my favorite authors of all time. That, of course, is my vampire queen, Anne Rice. This is Interview with a Vampire. Now with this, is it the vampire? Interview with the Vampire. I always say a vampire or the vampire. I'm pretty sure it's the vampire. Anyhow, atmospheric world building. I think any fantasy fan is going to love the way that she sets stuff up here. The way she has like these great noble houses, this great houses, this hierarchy in all of the different vampire culture. It's really, really good. The lore and the mythology is going to be just as rich and as deep as anything that you've come to really love in a fantasy story. Now, Interview with the Vampire is very much a character study and is very much about these characters kind of questing, going through the years and trying to either stay hidden or try to find others of their own kind. So there is like a low-key quest here. You've also got some of that dad shit that I like to put in there. Sometimes those things are really great. So you've got a coming-of-age story in here. You've got struggling with your place in life, and you have a long journey, a quest to find something. And I think that's going to adhere to every single fantasy fan out there. That's one of my favorite books ever. It's really, really great. Speaking of one of my favorite books ever, every time I make a list like this one does come up. Again, it's because it is one of my favorite books of all time, one of my favorite authors of all time. This is Ray Bradbury and Something Wicked This Way Comes. I think the greatest thing about fantasy is tropes. I know a lot of people look at tropes as a negative thing. For me, it's like I want to see those things in my fantasy stories. And one of my favorites, Stranger Comes to Town. And I think this book is one of the best Stranger Comes to Town books ever written. Allegorical fantasy, coming of age. This has so many things I think fantasy readers are going to love. Yes, it is very, very, very scary in many places, but it's also beautiful. It has great, great writing. Obviously, Ray Bradbury is one of the greatest to ever do it. But with this, I think it's just, you see these characters seeing something, maybe something supernatural, they're not quite sure, but not being able to kind of look away from it, wanting to kind of do the right thing. But I also love that this kind of struggles with a character dealing with the passing of time. About, are they too old to kind of do these things they're doing anymore? And any kind of character study like this, I feel like it is very fantastical. And this has so many different things for fantasy fans that I think you wouldn't expect to find in a book with the reputation that Something Wicked This Way Comes. Everybody's like, oh, it's just like a great fall read. Now it is, obviously, it's a great, great spooky season read. But I think it's really one of those that just kind of transcends that. And it's going to make even the hardest fantasy reader find something in it and be like, okay, that's something I really like. Especially, again, if you like Stranger Comes to Town with this very, very wicked carnival that has kind of sprung up in Greentown. Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. Now, before I get the response down below, yeah, I was kind of lukewarm on the book, and I think it's because I had high expectations for it. If you are looking for medieval horror fantasy, I think this is exactly what you will be looking for. Supernatural and religious themes. Anytime you throw a little bit of religious horror in there, I think it obviously hits another gear for me. That's why I like the Conjuring movies so much, I think. But gritty world, because you're dealing with real life events like the Black Plague, and it is going on through that. But the Black Plague is the second scariest thing in this book. So again, knights and monsters, guys. This is nothing that you're really be new to. Again, I think if you just replace you replace orcs with demons, I think you're going to find plenty to like here. Most fantasy stories out there deal with some kind of, religion, be it good or bad, or however it's going with the church, and all those things that you're not, it's not going to be foreign to you. You're going to like that. This has some really, really good stuff in it. Some things missed the mark for me, but again, I do like if you're one of those who likes stuff like The Last of Us or just anything where you've got an older person taking care of a child. I think that's something that's come up a lot. I bring up The Last of Us because that seems to be the most popular right now, but this is a genre that's been around for a while. Very much medieval version of The Road, I think, of Cormac McCarthy, and that's a good thing. But again, add a lot more monsters in it, and that's what you kind of get here. But yeah, fantasy fans are really going to dig this because it's very much historical fiction, but horror and fantasy kind of wrapped into it. So it's going to kind of, I guess they satisfy all those wants and desires if that's something you're looking for. But fantasy fans will be right at home with it because it never gets to the point where it's like super scary. It might be really like, holy crap, but never it's going to be a part where like you're like, oh, what was that sound in my house? It's not going to scare you or anything like that. Again, I find the Black Plague very disturbing, much more disturbing than I found, there's a monster in it. Weave World by Clive Barker. Read this one, gosh, when I did my very first spooky season. And at the time, I criticized it for kind of a dumb reason. I said that, it just felt like Walmart Dark Tower. It has some of those very, very similar things that make Dark Tower great. But what I appreciate about this is the dark fantasy elements. He really has a detailed version of magic in this world. You kind of got portal fantasy. You're going to another world. You're dealing with a lot of monsters and things like that. But it very much has that quest or a journey to find something. So I think in the end, all fantasy fans are always looking to go questing. You're always looking for get a group of characters together to go out there and try to make some journey somewhere to get to some end goal. And this has that in a very fantastical world. And the magic is very, very out there. And I think that Clive Barker really gets underrated as just how beautiful of a prose writer he really is, because he gets known for a horror guy. So horror writers can't ever write anything really, really beautiful. And I know some people are going to tell you ℙ𝕦𝕣𝕠𝕜𝕤. I haven't read ℙ𝕦𝕦𝕠𝕜𝕠 yet, but I've heard that one is very, very good as well. I read T. Kingfisher for the first time last year, and that was The Hollow Places. While I would say it didn't really scratch the itch I was looking for, but this is a very, very clear hat tip to Algernon Blackwood and his story The Willows, and that's one of my favorite horror stories ever. It's a story that apparently even scared H.P. Lovecraft, so that's called Respect of Your Peers. But again, more portal fantasy dealing with some eldritch and cosmic themes. Anytime you do that, you're getting a little Lovecraft, you're getting a little Blackwood in there. But exploring unknown lands, that's one here, because you are having, basically you're like in this network of a maze going through these kind of portals and trying to find your way back home. So again, a lot of stories, it is always, hey, let's get our quest done so and then try to fight our way back home. So again, questing, portal fantasy, horror monsters, you're kind of getting what I'm going at here. So again, replace orcs and goblins with hellfire and demons. I think that's kind of the way to go. A book I read last year and I really, really enjoyed was Slewfoot by Brom. Now, first, I want to say this guy has incredible artwork. So make sure you get the physical copy of this book if you're going to read it. Or I guess the Kindle version probably has them in there too. But his illustrations are just amazing. So yes, the author does do his own illustrations as well, and they're really, really awesome. But if you're one of those who's really into like folklore kind of horror, I think that his books are really going to be what you're looking for. You like that movie The Witch by Roger Eggers. I think you'll probably really dig this. So folklore and witchcraft. And you kind of think about the puritanical time period. Obviously, everyone who's acting a little weird must be a witch. Kind of deals with that. But you got your demons and monsters. And gosh, they are super, super memorable. And I think it's having the fantastical creatures in it that you may or may not recognize from folklore. And they also speak. And that obviously adds a new kind of twist to it. So Horror Narnia set in the Crucible. That's what I would sell this one as. But I thought that the Slewfoot was very, very good. And if you're looking for a really, really great female protagonist, I think that's kind of an Adelaide her. She is a really, really awesome character. And that's a book I won't forget. But I do need to read more Brom. I really, really enjoyed my first go-around with them. And I would recommend that's a great place, I think, for fantasy readers to start if you are into really like folklore and things like that. The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub. Again, another one that I've been vocal about not being crazy about, but I definitely think it would be a great place to start for someone who's into fantasy, doesn't want to dive into the Dark Tower, doesn't want something that intricate, because this is very much Dark Tower light. This kind of felt like the test run for what he was going to do with the Dark Tower. But again, portal fantasy is always going to be something that I'm going to recommend to first-time readers. But questing for a mythical item, I think that's something That's obviously going to resonate with all fantasy fans because in the end, I think that's one of my favorite tropes as well. How do we get this magical item that's going to fix everything, is going to set everything right? But also it has an animal companion. Sort of. You'll have to read to find out what I mean. It has a very memorable animal companion. And again, animal companions that can talk is like a cheat code. And this one has one of my favorites within Stephen King's universe. And yeah, my problems aside, it's a really great coming of age story. I think it was one of those where that and Black House, I was like, I had the things I didn't like about the Talisman, Black House fixed, and the things I loved about the Talisman, Black House didn't have. So it's like you take those two books, maybe I can make one perfect book. But I do think the Talisman is a really, really great entry point. It's not really super horrific, but it does have some stuff with this journey that you're going to kind of see some things that are really, really kind of freaky, and obviously dealing with a twinner, which is like, the alternate reality version of yourself. I think that's something that can be very, very scary to think about. The Fisherman by John Langan. And again, I know you guys are like, wait, these are all books you didn't like. Look, with The Fisherman, what I didn't like about it is it had that story within a story. But I do think that's something that fantasy readers will probably like. You like a good throwback in the middle of your story. Now, say, speaking of Dark Tower, think of Wizard and Glass, where you have your characters set up something and then they go into a 450-page flashback. And a lot of people didn't like that. This isn't quite that long, because I don't think the whole book is 450 pages. But from like a percentage point, yeah, it's about the same. It sets up something that's really, really awesome, and then it gives you the history of all this. Now, look, that history is really great. That story within a story is really great. My criticism of it is, I wish you would have just chose, do I want to give a modern day story or do I want to do the period piece? Because it really just felt like you were using this framing narrative as an excuse to tell the story. When I was like, you could have just told that story. But intricate lore, I really did like the story that's within the story. I just wish it had been set up that way. But Cosmic Entities, he has a very, very literary style that I think any fantasy reader will find very, very familiar, I think. And this is a book I see come up a lot with fantasy fans who read it after I said I wasn't wild about it, who actually said they really actually enjoyed it a lot. So again, with me, just because something didn't work for me doesn't think I wouldn't work for other people. I've been reading a lot more horror my whole life than other people have. So maybe I have different likes and dislikes, but I think as an entry point for fantasy readers, The Fisherman might scratch that itch what you're looking for, especially if you like someone with a more literary style of writing, like a Stephen Graham Jones or somebody like that. Fever Dream, George R. Martin. Yes, he has written books outside of the Song of Ice and Fire universe, and I didn't read this until like a couple years ago. Look, I'll be honest, at first I thought it was kind of just a dollar store version of Interview with the Vampire, but he does something very different. At first, it's like, yeah, you can tell he read Interview with the Vampire and he liked it a lot. He said, I can do this. But this is, obviously, George is an amazing writer. I mean, he's one of the best at writing a fantasy world. He does that here. It's in our world, and it's like during like a steamboat kind of story in Mississippi in like the early 1800s. I may get that date wrong. It's been a few years since I read it now. But detailed world building, and I think his vampire lore is very, very unique, what he does with his vampires. Because I think everyone kind of has their own rules, or they do the Bram Stoker rules, or they do other rules. And I think with this is he kind of has a way of making them unique. Great antagonist in this, I think. A foil, really, to our protagonist in the best kinds of ways. I think with a vampire book, it's going to be a little bit of an easier sell with fantasy fans because you're able to kind of get in there a lot easier. You're ready for something to be a little bit fantastical with vampires that don't sparkle. Obviously, if they sparkle, that's fine. Again, as long as you're reading, guys, I'm happy. But with Fever Dream, I think you'll find a lot to like. Maybe if, say, Interview with the Vampire was a little bit too much for you, I think Fever Dream would be a better place to approach it because it isn't quite as heavy-handed. It's like, this vampire with guilt and things like that as Interview with the Vampire does. Where our main character in Interview with the Vampire is very, very unreliable narrator and is very, very depressed and miserable and is full of remorse. With Fever Dream, I don't think you're going to quite get that. It isn't as much of a character study as that one is. This one is more about the world, and obviously George is one of the best at filling out a world. And the last one is not going to be a book per se. It's behind me on the shelf back there. It is going to be a comic, and it is going to be not by Stephen King, but by the son of Stephen, as I like to call him. This is Joe Hill, and the story is Lock and Key. Now, if you've only watched the pathetic adaptation on Netflix, do yourself a favor and pick this up immediately because it is better than that show in every single way. Very, very unique mythology. I think that this, when I first started reading this, I was just so blown away by how much he was putting on these pages, how much world building he was doing, how much these dark fantasy kind of creatures, almost like that Guillermo del Toro kind of way, just really stuck in my memory for a while. And you've got this family who's went through a traumatic event, and they're all sticking together to kind of go on this quest. Very, very much fantastical in that way. Strong usage of magic. I think if you're wanting some magic, you're going to find that there. Ghosts, goblins, all kinds of creepy things. You're going to find all those things that you love about fantasy in Lock and Key. And I think it's very much approachable for modern audiences because it starts not like in a fantasy world. It's in modern times, but it goes really, really deep into it. And I really don't want to say too much because that's a story. I don't want to ruin anything for you. I think that if you're one of those people who's like, I don't like comics either, that's a great starting point because I think Lock and Key is definitely one of the greatest, and it's finished, guys. It's a finished series, and it's really, really awesome. If you like any Joe Hill books too, I think you really are doing yourself a disservice if you have not read Lock and Key. It's really awesome. For me, look, all of these have a strong feeling of like the traveling party or going questing, traveling long distances, coming of age, growing sense of brotherhood and camaraderie. That, to me, is the things that make fantasy go round. I love these things. And I kind of joked about, hey, replace your dragons with demons. And in many cases, it's really not that far off. You could say, I could take the story. I could replace these characters with, warriors or knights or elves and dwarves. And the monster that they're fighting, just make it a dragon or something. And you say, hey, I could see this working out. So there are a few books I think that actually will work. Won't work with everything. I know there are a lot of people now who are saying that Lonesome Dove could be a fantasy story if you make them knights instead of cowboys. That's kind of a tougher sell for me. But for these, I think if you use those mechanics right there, these are very much going to be some books that I think fantasy fans would like. So if you're feeling a little left out every October when I spend a lot of time on horror, you're probably not watching this. But if you are, and you want to kind of join me for some things, you want to talk about some things this October, these are 10 that I absolutely recommend. These are just 10 great books. Some worked for me, some didn't, but I could see why others love some of them as well, and that's why I feel safe recommending them to you, even if they weren't really exactly for me. If these are the things you're looking for, these 10 will give you exactly what you need this October. So guys, have you read any of these? Are you interested in reading any of these? Or do you have any other recommendations? I want everybody to feel free to drop down in the comments and let me know some other recommendations that you would say, hey, these are some horror books that I think fantasy fans would probably dig, because it is a very, very thin line. It is very much where it's like, hey, well, I just think you'll like this book, and that's different. I made that video of horror books that are just good stories. I think that'll be for anybody. But particularly for fantasy fans, I think there's certain things that we do look for, and I think these have those. So if you have any other suggestions, please drop them below, and I will talk to you there.